So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We had actually 300 signups for this webinar. So a lot of interest around this area. If you don't know me, I'm Fernando Redivo. I'm the marketing and communications manager of the System Dynamics Society. I'm usually your host here at the seminar series where we host different topics around system dynamics and systems thinking. And today we have here Irene, Coco, and Nikki talking about modeling with soft variables and limited data. This webinar today is based on the work of a recent published paper in the System Dynamics Review. So maybe I can send here a link in the chat for you guys. Soon, if you haven't read the paper, you can go here and read it. And I want to take a brief moment to invite you all for the conference. We are going to Boston next year. We're meeting from August 3rd to 7th in Boston. The venue is going to be the Boston University. And you can start preparing your submissions because the submission window is from January 21 to March 18th. And the theme of next year's conference is incorporating AI into dynamic modeling. We're not accepting only around research around this topic. All research is welcome to submit, but the focus of the conference is going to be AI in system dynamics modeling. And I also want to thank all society members. I usually thank the society sponsors here, but I also want to thank all the society members. It's only through their help that we are continuously able to spread the word about system dynamics. So if you're not a member of the System Dynamics Society yet, you can go to our website and become a member and unlock all the benefits of being a System Dynamics Society member, such as watching all the past seminar recordings and other benefits that we have. And of course, our sponsors are a great support for us. Thank you all for sponsoring the System Dynamics Society. And if you'd like to become a sponsor, you can email me at office@systemdynamics.org. We are using today full of UR to collect your questions, as we're going to be we are 100 participants already. So you can scan this QR code on your screen, or you can go also in your browser and use this link that I'll put in the chat here. Oops, sorry, not here. Here. And I want to take a brief moment to know where you're joining us from, since we are a big crowd today. And you can go also scan this QR code at the top of your screen, or just go to the link in the chat. And later on, you can send your questions through the same link. So you can take this few seconds and join us there. I see there's a lot of people joining from the Netherlands and Colombia, USA, Italy, Brazil, Sweden, Portugal. Oh, there's someone from Lisbon. We should meet. California, Pakistan. You know, we see a lot of time zones here from east to west. A lot of people joining us. So thank you, everyone, for joining. It's great to see such a big crowd, such a big interest in system dynamics, and specifically in this topic. I'm sure that both Irene and Coco are happy to present their work today for you all. Our quick agenda for today, we're going to have 45 minutes presentation and then 15-20 minutes of Q&A. So prepare your questions and send through the platform that we just used. And I'm happy to introduce you to the three presenters today. So Irene Plucianota is a lecturer in systems thinking for sustainability at the University College London. She focuses on helping decision makers in complex multi-stakeholder settings, designing sustainability strategies, using participatory approaches and decision analysis. And then we have Coco. She's a research fellow at the University College London. She specializes in system dynamics and systems thinking. Her work supports organizational decision-making and policy design, aiming at creating healthy, sustainable, and resilient environments. And Nick is not here yet, but she'll join us very soon. She's an associate professor at the University College London. She explores sustainability, city transformation, and organizational change. She also works with diverse stakeholders, from policymakers to residents, using participatory research. And she's an award winner and active contributes to the System Dynamics Society. I want to thank you all for being here today, especially the presenters. Irene, that's all from my side. You can share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you again. Thank you, Coco, for being here.
Thank you so much, Fernando. And hi, everyone. I'm starting sharing my screen. And you can see it in presentation mode now, I think.
Yeah, we can see your slides, Irene.
Okay. Okay, here I am. Hi, everyone, and it's so nice to see all of you here. I'm Irene Pluchinotta, and as Fernando said, I'm a lecturer in system thinking for sustainability at University College of London. And today we will discuss on how to deal with soft variable and data scarcity for model quantification during participatory processes. I will be the main speaker today as I coordinated this activity, but I have to be honest, this has been a team effort, a wonderful team effort. So there is Coco, our researcher and modeler in system dynamics, and Nikki, our professor in system dynamics, that will be part of the Q&A, and Coco will present some of the activities that we carried out. Okay. So let's start. What is the background of this activity? Let's go with some basic info. So we all know that system dynamics models are basically models used also for structuring problems and support decision makings for structuring complex problems. So this implies that they are extremely useful and often, used for investigating areas in which there is a limited knowledge available, and also they are also very useful when you want to describe relationship, nonlinear relationship, and including also intangible elements. And all these characteristics are very common when you want to support and to understand social, environmental, economic system that we need an holistic approach. But then our question was, is this exploratory nature of the system dynamic modeling approach an advantage or a challenge? Because the key element is that what happens when we need to quantify the intangible. So the more qualitative aspect of the problem that we model. What happens if the usual analytic methods for model quantification cannot really be properly applied due to data scarcity? And then also because when we want to work with the participatory process, the methods for releasing quantification and quantifying quantification information are limited. There is not much in the literature helping with that. So this is where we started. And within this context, the objective of this talk and the paper that you saw now is to suggest a quantification framework that can provide guidance on how different types of data can be elicited in relation to data availability and also in relation to the level of stakeholder engagement. In the second part of this talk, we will talk more about this image and what is this framework about. I think I want to provide a bit more information on the context and go back to have some reflection on the quantification practices in the system dynamic community. So the mainstream quantification practice, for who is not familiar with them, focus on using analytical mathematical methods and approach to formulate and estimate the model parameters, but also to compare the model with historical data set and so on. There are also methods based on participatory approaches that basically are helpful for quantifying, for example, soft variables. And these basically rely on asking the participant, the stakeholders, or the expert, basically to estimate a certain parameter, giving a range, or to give him more information on the data type and availability. And again, are some suggestions of the methodology that are outside there in literature, but we thought they would be useful to have a recap. But what we realize is that despite the availability of the method that I just mentioned, there are a lot of open questions that demand attention when it comes to data scarcity, because basically this methodology assumed that there is the engagement with stakeholders, for example, can provide enough knowledge for quantification, and they don't really address what to do in case of data scarcity or how to behave. So that is why we have some of our open question in model quantification are around these 3 key points. The first one is about how to quantify soft variables, because soft variables, like for example, perception, trust, sometimes are just a they just sum up, basically summarize some underlying construction, the participant mental model. So within the definition of some of these soft variables, sometimes you need to investigate a bit more to get it, to understand what is the meaning of it. And the other point is that we are curious to know and to also know your opinion on how a model with a majority of soft variable and not linear relationship, so high level uncertainty, can still provide system insights, and what type of skills then the modeler need in order to build this type of model in a robust way. And the third point that we want to make, it's about to what extent the participatory process is needed for model quantification, and what methods could help facilitating a participatory quantification process in a rigorous way. So, getting closer to all the scripts that we have available, what do we do in case of quantification when we have data scarcity and we want to engage with stakeholders. Basically, what happened is that we build up basically from existing methodologies, some of the ones that I listed, and adapting them under a very operational perspective. And we did that we are going to do that. And we'll first show you the activities, the quantification activity that we carried out during our participatory system dynamic modeling process in Thamesmead in London, a case study in London, looking on how to address urban sustainability. And afterwards, we will reflect on that, and we will show you our framework, so a general framework on what will be, how to quantify in a participatory way system dynamics model. We can go into the detail a little bit of what is the Thamesmead case study, because it will give you the background, the context in which we operate, and then we started having these ideas and these challenges. So again, going back to the case study, it's basically part of 2 large projects called the Cush and Camellia that run from 2019 until 2024-25. And the area, it's Thamesmead, it's an area in London that is Thamesmead, it's a place of vulnerability and opportunities. It's one of the most deprived neighborhoods in England, where very high level of child poverty and unemployment, and a number of social rented households. However, it has a very extensive network of green and blue spaces, including the canals and the river side, and also artificial lakes. And basically, it's since 2019, Thamesmead, it's going under an extensive urban regeneration project. It's a 30 years urban regeneration project. And we're happy to be part of this process with the main decision makers. The main objective of the Thamesmead case study is, of course, was to use participatory system dynamic process to bring together the Thamesmead stakeholders and to jointly scope the focus of this work. So we did it in order to inform their decision-making process in an operational way. We wanted to understand the stakeholder perspectives and priorities. We wanted to model with them and analyze systemic intervention. And then we wanted to collectively identify strategies via, of course, a stock and flow model. So this is where we started. And of course, we had to engage with a variety of stakeholders. I will not go into the detail here. But our process, basically, just to offer an overview, when we set up this participatory system dynamic modeling process, the stakeholders were involved in every step of the process. So we jointly defined a shared concern, so a topic that they basically wanted to discuss and to investigate with us and between themselves. And this was a very high level topic about the quality of the natural space in the area. We built different causal diagrams, we analyzed them. And then after this analysis, we had another discussion with the stakeholders, and they decide basically on what will be the focus of the modeling process. So what type of challenge and decision they wanted to investigate together, and they decided to have a focus on how to increase the use of natural space in Thamesmead, because very surprisingly, the area is completely unused. Residents or average Londoners, they do not go in Thamesmead to use that large quantity of green and blue spaces. So we then went through our quantity modeling phase, and we will talk more about what were the quantification challenges. I have to be honest to say that this case study produced also other two simulation models that are not the focus of today. One is on the natural space performance, and the other one is about full urban flood resilience. Again, we focus on the use of natural space in Thamesmead. What we did with the stakeholders is that we used system thinking to understand the views of the views that each group of stakeholders have of this shared concern. This qualitative activity is described in another paper, but I wanted to focus, or if you see that this forecast diagram, if you understand, if you consider that each color is a different topic or theme, you can understand already the variety of topic and elements that needed to be included in our simulation model. Again, several sources of knowledge. Then we were able to build our qualitative model, and we tested some strategies with the stakeholders for, again, ways on how to improve the use of urban natural space in Thamesmead. The model and the activity is described in a second paper that is linked here. And the model had an interface. So the stakeholders were actively testing scenarios, and then we were basically sharing their own learnings around what they learned, again, with the objective to inform their own decision-making and agreeing on priorities on the area. But the point is that we had to address, when we started building this model, we quickly realized with Coco and Nikki that there were a lot of challenges related to the quantification process. For example, the castle diagram on the use of natural space had a large number of soft variable, intangible values, and also many nonlinear relationship between tangible and intangible variables. And we were having, difficulties in quantifying that. And more surprising for us, the topic of the use of natural space is completely understudied in literature. So the literature, again, was not helping in this case. So to address the quantification challenges that I just described, together with the stakeholder, we agreed to ground also the quantification process in a participatory approach. And this will further basically help it, because further increase the stakeholder knowledge on the topic, and also our knowledge on the topic, and also increase their confidence in using the simulation model afterwards, also after our role as a modeler ended, so by themselves, using the model and the interface by themselves. So again, the objective of our quantification process was to quantify model relationship, baseline values of variables, to estimate other parameters using different sources of information as part of our overall participatory modeling process. And then we use this following set of activities and techniques. So you see, this is a ladder. We started with the very bottom. Coco will provide several details on the example of the activity, but I want just to give you an overview very quickly. So we started developing a preliminary simulation model following the underlying structure of the castle diagram built during a group model building session. Then we tried to gather initial preliminary behavior over time graphs drawn by the stakeholder. We did literature search and data search, trying to understand what data set and literature were available. And then for the part of the model that we still were able not to quantify, thanks to the literature and data search, we basically submitted online quantification form in which we were asking to academic experts basically if they were aware of, they had knowledge about certain connection or certain estimates of variable. Once we did that, we processed a very high level of, high quantity of information, very large amount of information. And then we decide to run another sensitive analysis to further narrow down, in relation to the quantity of variables and linkage that still we had to quantify, to further narrow down the one that they really needed our attention, that were very key and pivotal for our model. Then we decide to basically collect this remaining information thanks to participatory quantification workshop and then specific ad hoc quantification meetings. Again, Coco here now will give you so many more examples on how those activities, some of those activities look like in practice. And then I will go back to say about the quantification framework, the generic quantification framework. Thanks.
Thanks, Irena. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. My name is Coco Jo. Fernando and Irena has introduced me. My area of expertise is system dynamics modeling and system thinking in environment decisions and policies. And I want to probably just also add another line that before joining UCL, I also have a background in community-based system dynamics. So it feels like really good, like we will be talking about participatory work today. So my role will be showing you a bit of like real life examples of how we applied the quantification framework to the specific case study. Next, please. So you will be saying like this is the partially the model of the use of blue and green spaces. We call it UOS, and that's just an acronym we have. And at the bottom right corner, you have the full use of space model. Obviously, today our goal is not to give you like all of the details about the model, but I just want to kind of highlight there's a full model documentation elsewhere, and today we will just be focused partially on some variables and examples of how we use the quantification framework in understanding the model of use of space. Next, please. So for the illustration purpose, I'm going to just focus on a few variables and their relationships. So in this context, the use of blue and green spaces is a key sort of like a variable that we're looking at, which is the number of visits individuals made to the natural environment in 7 days. So that includes parks, that also includes lake spaces within Thamesmead. So that has been influenced by multiple factors. Obviously, that's sort of information we have previously elicited in participatory workshops. So that include perceived safety. So to what extent residents really feel safe to use a space and to be there, and also the usabilities of space. So that refers to the space's physical elements that directly influence the possible use of space. Obviously, that includes if there's nearby sort of public transports, but also that's influenced by co-design. So if the space has been designed to encourage people to use or to meet people's demands for the space, and also the space conditions. But one of the key variables that drives usability is also accessibility. So how easy the space is for others to access and use from one location to another location. So at the right top corner, you will see that's the framework Irena have shared, and I will just pinpointing a few specific examples that we used to quantify those specific variables. Next, please. So one of the specific sort of like activity we used is called quantification forms. So those are the forms that we distributed to individual participants, and we are trying to understand how do we quantify the model from their perspective. So we developed a list of variables that we're interested in that we cannot find enough information from the literature review. So that already put us in the sort of like the middle point of the ladder of the framework activities. And the example you see here is a quantification form for a variable called accessibility of blue and green spaces. So the participant will be asked to add their description, their units, and their comments here. And you see here, the participant was saying something about transportation, physical obstacles, etc. So those information are already helping us of understanding and quantifying the model a bit further. And for the quantification of stocks, so for example, the blue and green space condition itself is one of the key sort of indicator in regeneration projects. We are also interested in the current value and the goal in the future. And the comments are really helpful because, for example, you see the example here that the participant gave us directly a website link that help us to explore and think out of like the literature that we already have. Next, please. For the relationships, we also have the quantification forms, and that's in format of we gave them a variable A and we gave them variable B, and there's multiple sets of those variables, and we gave the participants a freedom to sort of like doing their own way and to provide information on how variable A influences B. And you see the two examples here. While they are both focusing on the idea of accessibility to blue and green spaces, one participant sort of like draw it directly, and another one provide more of like a text-based sort of like information about it and with additional resources and comments around it. So just to flag that with this type of forms, you get all sorts of information, but that also give you lots of like information points to helping understand the model structure further and also additional resources. Next, please. So when that is not enough, we move further up to the ladder. That's when we sort of like engaging participants in workshops and meetings. Those meetings and the workshops have the goal of further present our models, validate the structures, validate the current information, but also understand specific sections or data sets that are still missing. You will have like the full agenda of those type of activities in the paper, but I just want to highlight probably one of the key things we tried in the quantification workshop is called behavior over time activity. So many of you may have been very familiar with this, but I will just provide one or two examples for clarity. Next, please. So how did we do this? Well, this was done during COVID, so we had to do it online innovatively through a mirror board. And you see here are the two mirror boards we had for two variables. And one is for the blue and green spaces condition, another one for the usability of blue and green spaces. At the bottom, you see those gray areas. Those are like the easily replicable post-its that we already have there. So we're interested in participants' view of the variables' past behaviors and their hopes and fears for future and additional comments they may have. So the two variables, the space condition and usability here, we gave them a predefined time horizon from 2010 to 2050. And 2018 was roughly when the regeneration was starting, and the 2021 was when the mirror board was sort of like used to engage with participants. So we try to capture how they think about the historical performance of something over time, and also their future wish and hope and fears for the variable with regeneration and without regeneration. As you see here, there are two sort of like separate lines in both of the behavior over time graphics. And we also asked them to provide additional comments. So for example, it might be really hard to read here, but for example, for the graph of space condition, one of the participants made a specific comment about maintenance can be really limited over the long term, and that eventually fit into one of the scenario testing we did for the model. Next, please. So overall, this is the same sort of sector model I have shown on my first slide, but you get an idea of how, like, with some variables that involves more of like complex quantification exercise or activities, while others are more straightforward. We also included, for example, an empirical data set. One of the specific one we used was a natural environment survey by Natural England in the UK. So with that being included, we also ask for experts understanding, for example, residents' leisure time and how do we quantify such things. So those are pragmatic, but also iterative process. And I hope some of the examples help to bring the quantification framework more to like the ground. But you have all of the appendix with documentation about such activities. Thanks. Over to you, Irena.
Thank you so much, Coco. If we move forward on this, again, from Coco, you heard about practical examples, but then I think that after we run these different quantification activities and we went through the ladder, we started reflecting on the process that we carried out and how we try to deal with the challenges of quantifying some of the qualitative information with data scarcity, under data scarcity. So this is why we suggest the following practical quantification framework. We basically, that is this one, we basically, again, we build up on existing methods and technique, the already existing quantification framework, but we adapt that under an operational perspective using our learnings. And we use with this table and with this figure, we include in basically all the quantification activity that modeler can select when quantifying a system dynamic model under different level of data availability and stakeholder engagement, and vice versa. In case of a participatory framework, participatory process, the framework underlines what is possible, what possible quantification activities there are around. So the table, for example, it has the column are around the type of quantification activities, the level of data availability, the level of stakeholder engagement, and then the type of engagement and the purpose. And if we try to read the table, the figure just represents exactly the same content, is almost just nicer way. For example, if we follow the color code, we have that, for instance, in case of a high data availability and low engagement, the framework suggests the use of literature review and data search. Okay, that are the two red that are there. In case of a medium level of stakeholder commitment, the online quantification form could help in gathering useful and well-identified information in a structured way. So especially those type of information that are too part of a niche in literature, that a standard literature search does not capture them, or in case there are elements, for example, related from gray literature of materials that stakeholders and organizational experts hold within their company. So again, it's very useful to have these online quantification forms. And then lastly, the quantification meetings and workshops are very effective activities in case of low data availability and higher level of stakeholder engagement. Since it's not always easy, basically, to identify the right method to use, the idea behind this generic quantification framework is that we advise basically on what type of activities could be run in certain conditions. However, we still advise to structuring the quantification process according to a degree of stakeholder engagement and data availability. So starting basically from the methods that have that are more appropriate in case of high data availability, but basically having option in case those data are not available. So this is about the framework, and I'm starting. Starting the third part and closing part of our talk, basically bringing three clear reflections that we had while we were running these activities and building this framework. So first of all, it's good to remember what were the impact of our Thamesmead case study. So the model and the modeling approach, although it had a strong assumption and some level of uncertainty, still allowed knowledge co-production between the different stakeholders, holding all those different perspectives basically on the issue, as I represented in that very colored slide. And then it still allowed a conversational levers and informed decision-making. It helped the structuring, unpacking, and managing the complexity around such a topic that was pivotal for the case study, but not studied in literature, and then helped reach an agreement on priorities and next steps for their decision-making processes. So that is very important to keep in mind. Now, the first of our three key reflections is that at the end of the journey, we still consider extremely useful modeling the issue rather than modeling where data are available. There are difficulties in operationalizing soft variable. However, if you think, already Forrester in 92 emphasizes that if we reduce our modeling effort in the areas where we have only quantitative data available, then we only represent part of the real world. So often the complex issues that we support and we help unpacking will help our stakeholder unpacking are these type of issues in which data is not available. So what do we do in that case? Do we run away? We don't build models? So that is our first reflection. The second one is about the role of the quantitative models of conceptual nature that can still be used to lead to system insights. Quantitative model of this kind of rather conceptual nature, so relying more on nonlinear relationship, for example, in soft variable, has several implications. For example, strong assumption, high level uncertainty. However, if we think about the original SD models are not supposed to be predictive model, but they are supposed to enhance increase people understanding of a certain problem. For example, identify leverage points, support strategic thinking on the problem, and identify possible area in which solutions should consider. And if you think also this type of model, they kind of basically do this activity in an even more pronounced way because they act on a topic and a problem that is understudied. So I think that our model with the interface and with the simulation, they were used as a boundary object to trigger discussion and support decision-making process. And I have to say, our stakeholders reflected also on the assumption of the model, so the limitation of the model, because of course we make them transparent and we make them aware of that. The third key reflection is about the importance of facilitating a participatory quantification process with rigors. It's not always easy to identify what is the right method to apply when we need to quantify a model in a participatory way. And when we reflected on the limitation that we had and the difficulties that we had to overcome for each activities, we basically come out with the idea of proposing a generic quantification framework building up on existing methodologies. And again, we recommend using this quantification framework basically according to the level of stakeholder engagement and data availability, and always start from the step in which data is available. So with the methodology that use more data. That will help a bit with the rigorous. But then on the other side, I think that offering workshop agenda and offering other example, in addition to the one already present in literature, of what a quantification form could look like, we hope we could help the quantification process. And then all of this is basically described in the paper that you already have in the chat. However, if you want to know more about the Thamesmead case study and all the system dynamic activities that we run, here you have a list of all the publication around it, and more will be to come. I think that our next step, it's going to be to try to have a good use of this quantification framework for our own activities and promote this as much as possible, because of course more methods will arrive over time. So we don't consider this quantification framework as a final point, or more a starting point to trigger discussion around the topic on how to quantify models when there is data scarcity and under data scarcity and with stakeholder engagement. So that's it from our side, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Irene and Coco. This was great presentation, really, really good. I saw that Nikki also joined us a few minutes ago. So hi, Nikki, thank you for being here today. We do have a couple of questions, not a couple, we have a few dozens of questions. So I'll just share my screen here, and maybe I hope that we can go over a few of them at least. If you haven't sent your question, you can go through the link in the chat or scan this QR code on your screen and send your questions here. I also ask if you want to upvote or downvote questions here so we can answer the most popular ones. I'll start by this one at the top. Let me see here. So they're asking, you might have already addressed this, but I'm curious to hear how you have managed to reconcile structural differences between different expert suggestions for quantifications.
I can probably start with this, but then Coco and Nikki, of course, if you have anything to add, feel free. It's a very good point. We asked this ourselves too. I think that we did it in two ways. First of all, we started from a very specific selection of the experts. So we avoided a wide, submission of, for example, the online quantification form. So we identify within the projects, the partners, and also the academics that are with us at UCL. We were identifying basically key experts, leading experts in certain sectors of the model. And so we went in a very direct and ad hoc way. However, when we had some of different information that was more relevant for the behavioral over time activities that we run at the end for the remaining elements with the stakeholders, we ran that, we kind of worked with that in two ways. On one way, we discussed it back with the stakeholders to try to reach reach an agreement on what was the best behavioral over time graph for them. And then on the other side, we try to apply a more qualitative research approach. So we were 3 modellers. So in case we were basically trying to reach consensus across us, evaluating pro and cons on the elements that we were considering. So it's the same activity when you have, for example, qualitative coding around that. I'm very curious to hear if Nikki or Coco have more answer, a different answer on this.
Nothing different from me, so thank you, Irene. Maybe just a further thought, because kind of people might expect that different experts give different answers, but actually what we also found that it's not just different answers from different people, but also even with the quantitative information we had, depending on how we summarize that statistically and kind of what methods we used and whether we included or excluded a certain year that was a bit of an outlier. Also kind of there we needed to make, of course, decisions on, and it was not always that straightforward. So this having some uncertainty, I think that does not only exist when we engage participants, but even when we work with quantitative data. And that's what we very much noticed here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Rin. Thank you, Nikki. Moving on to the next one. What was the added value of the quantified model with all limitations and difficulties that you faced over just presenting findings in a qualitative model?
That is an extremely good question. With the quantified model, the stakeholders were able to test scenarios. So we still have, under the assumption and uncertainty of the model, they will still be able to understand how to prioritize the elements affecting the use of natural space. So with the interface, they were independent in doing that. So they basically, yes, had a qualitative model that was still able to provide them with the relevant information. So I think that qualitative model will not be able to do this, as because type of behavior can be, of course, only behavior over time can be only described basically via the quantified model. I would like to know, yes, if Coco or Nikki have any comments on this too.
Thanks, Irina. I think I would just add something quickly. I guess we are not sort of like separating two things completely here. The qualitative model greatly influenced the quantification model. That's also why we're having a bit of like challenges trying to quantify all of them. But also in the interface that eventually now is being used for like those kind of conversations with residence panels, for example, we have the qualitative model or simplified version of the causal loop diagram always embedded in the interface. So we used that as also a way to communicating the model assumptions to them. So I think we are kind of working both ways. Like there's sometimes a qualitative model for communication, for challenging like the model assumptions, but there's also like the interface and quantitative aspect for people to test different scenarios. So I won't think like that's necessarily two things in this case. Great question.
The next one here is, was it clear when a variable was soft, which variables went into the quantification activities?
Yes, it was clear to us when a variable was soft. Again, they look like a perception of something and so on. And also the relationship between this intangible and the tangible variables. Like, of course, the tangible variable were more, for example, the weekly use of the space or something around that. All the variables went in the quantification activity from the very beginning. Then we started narrow down a certain point when we, for the one that still they needed a certain level of quantification, we further narrowed them down thanks to an extra sensitivity analysis to try to understand which one they were extremely key for the behavior of the model. So again, from the beginning, all the models went into quantification activity, and then we started narrowing down because some of them we were still not able to fully quantify them. But I think we discussed all of them with the relevant stakeholders during the validation process. Coco, Nikki, do you have any extra comment on this?
I guess one of the specific challenging quantification sector is around community awareness, because the Thamesmead regeneration, they really value and they really want to bring the co-design approach to the project. So a lot of the variables were regarding if community can perceive the regeneration and the value of the how it impacted blue and green spaces, etc. So I think those things are very limited documented in the current literature, beyond like accessibility and that type of variables and so on. So I think that was also one of the sectors we feel like that's very soft in a way, that there's no not much literature around. Yeah.
Thank you. Many thanks for this helpful presentation. How long did this quantification process take? What is the time frame? Please ignore if I can find this in the paper.
Yes, you can find that in the paper, but I'm very happy to answer. So it took us longer than we expected, for sure. Also because after each step of the ladder, we kind of took a bit of time to kind of adjust ourselves, adjust the methodology in what we were doing. And then we start looking for other methodology and so on. So I think it took overall over 6 months, but again, was not the only activity for all of us. And we took several breaks to try to understand what will be the best next step. So again, was again, not purely only a quantification process, but there were also reflection and learning from our side on what to do next. Nikki, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I mean the time it always it always takes longer, and of course you need to consider that kind of, particularly when you work with others, kind of you need to plan, and also they need to be able to have the time. So for example, when we sent out quantification forms, we did not get back the answer immediately because they also needed to have some time, or when we set up the workshops there was another delay to invite everyone, and it is more like it's an entire kind of process that needs to be managed, and also something that kind of then, for example, the engagement ran on the side of also kind of further work with the model, for example. So often things are happening in parallel.
Great. Have you faced any criticism about your quantification, and how did you respond to it?
This is an extremely interesting question. I guess the criticism is from the academic community or from the stakeholders, not sure. From the stakeholder, I can answer from that point of view. Since this was a participatory process and we involved them in literally every step of the process, was a very highly participatory process, they kind of embraced the process itself, and they felt confident in using the model, knowing about the limitation and the uncertainty. You will find more on that in the paper, both papers, the one describing the model and the one describing the quantification process. So I think we resolved the criticism on the go, step after step, and that allows us also to adjust, the other way. I mean, what will be to collect other ways of quantifying, basically other quantification methodology. Coco, Nikki, do you have any comment on this?
I won't say probably criticism, but I think definitely it took a bit of time to build the trust and to let the stakeholders feel like this is like they are also like they also own the model. So I earlier saw a question about like how does this connect to CBSD with Peter Hoffman's work, which I think is a brilliant question. I guess one of the things is here we have lots of meetings, lots of workshops with the stakeholders, and one of the idea, of course, is to help with the model quantification, but on the other hand, trying to transfer sort of like an ownership from the model to them so they could understand it and use it on their needs. So I think it took a bit of time to build that level of trust and rapport. Nikki, do you want to come in for that point as well?
Yeah, and also I don't remember any like real criticism we received like from the stakeholders or from the academic community, But what I remember is that our stakeholders, of course, they would have liked to have certainty. So they asked us for specific and very precise answers, which we could not always give, where we then needed to bring it back to them and actually say, well, actually, you are the experts here. You are the ones who still have the best and most comprehensive knowledge in this area. So sometimes they did not want to trust their own knowledge, particularly if they could not put a quantitative number or something. So it was also this kind of process of accepting that things might not be precise to the last digit of a number, and that also kind of a participatory process and kind of the knowledge that you generate kind of from multiple participants and multiple kind of angles, that actually that is valid. And they did like that in the end, but of course it was a step by step process.
And to add to that, I mean, again, one of the impacts of the case study that the stakeholders then started using by themselves, so without even our involvement at a certain point, the same interface and the same model that they were, they were part of the building process. So at the end, we achieved that. It just took a bit longer than not participatory approaches.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. How were the stakeholders chosen? Was it a uniform group, or did it depend on the issue variable?
So this is probably two ways of answering this. So the stakeholders of the case study, so the very long list that I showed at the beginning, were basically selected following a stakeholder analysis activity on the basically taking into consideration the issues of the area and also snowballing. So again, from the very beginning, we included a large variety of stakeholders. On the other side, for the quantification process, we went where there was knowledge. So if we needed expert on the connection between the use of natural space and the physical mental health, we had some specific academics that were able to answer that. If we had the information on the role of the maintenance, capacity and skills, so not only the budget influencing the use of space, influencing the space condition, then we went to stakeholders that they were responsible for the maintenance of the area and that they were basically working directly on the area. So again, for the quantification, we went where the knowledge was. Overall, for the process, we had a large variety of stakeholders that basically included regional authorities, local authorities like the Greater London Authority, the Environmental Agency, other environmental charities and organizations, the residents, some other academics, and then I don't remember, I think, yes, I think that's it, the main key stakeholders, some service provider in the area. So I think that was a large group of stakeholders.
Thank you, Irene. There's a popular question here. Were you able to observe or assess an increase in systems thinking abilities among your participants?
Very good question. We are trying to assess it now while we talk in these weeks. This is one of the paper under development. So we'll talk about observation for now. Yes, we observed an increase on system thinking, but this is part of the overall participatory system dynamic process in Thamesmead. When we started, the ability in system thinking were of course limited. When we were already having the meetings around testing the scenario with the interface, or before that the quantification activities, some of the stakeholders at the beginning, they were a bit not confident with the methodology. They started reading and interacting with our castle diagram without an issue. And also the point that when they used our model and the interface for their own activities with the local residents, we were not involved, and their activities, basically their workshop for testing further scenario with the local residents, was basically run by the key developers, the key decision maker in the area. And again, they became owner and they were able to explain the the system aspect behind the model than then the residents use it by themselves. So I think, yes, we observed yes. I'm curious to hear Nikki's and Coco comments on this. But for the assessment, I will not talk about that yet. But yes, definitely we observed increase.
Yeah, thank you. I think most of that is still under analysis. And one finding that we had, it was not kind of from the quantification process. That was rather from the participatory engagement process in the beginning when we did workshops, where we did a microanalysis of these workshops. So we analyzed them word by word, sentence by sentence, what was said. And we noticed that the amount that participants kind of tell stories decreased over the time of the workshop, but the amount of time that they use model type of language, that they say, oh, this links to that, etc., or this is a variable, that increased over time. So kind of, yeah, it did exemplify through participating. They were put in a context where they learned that language, they learned that thinking, they learned feedback thinking, but that more specifically relates to the beginning participatory activities rather than the quantification. It's so far that's a system dynamics conference paper from a few years ago, but we don't have the journal paper yet.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Din. This was right. So next one here. How did you incentivize participation from the key stakeholders? Did you encourage?
It's again a great question. I think this also refers, like the one before, to the overall participatory system dynamic process. Participation was the engagement process. At the beginning of the engagement process, took quite a bit of time at the very beginning of 2019 when we started all those activities. Then I think we had no key issue with the incentivize the participation. However, we had to deal with the busy agenda of all the stakeholders. So planning a workshop with a large number of stakeholders or certain stakeholders that had very senior roles in their own organization could also means agreeing on a date, on a day 2 months in advance or something around that. So yes, I think it was more about working with them through the process. And I have to say that the fact that they were involved in each step of the process and that decide the focus of both the qualitative and the quantitative modeling steps, phases. So basically, they were kind of feeling the ownership and the responsibility to be part of the activities. Again, but this has to take into consideration their busy agenda and so the difficulties in arranging meetings with them, I have to be honest. Nikki, Coco, do you have any more to add to this from your perspective?
No, I think that's beautiful, Irina. I think ownership is a key. They are driven, then they want the model to help with better design and co-design the space. I think definitely the biggest incentive was the ownership of the model.
Yes, I agree. And again, the group of stakeholders decide to work together with us and focusing on how to increase the use of natural space in the area. So again, we didn't suggest that. And to be honest, we were not even that much prepared to that topic at the very beginning, but now we are all experts on that.
Well, since we won't have time to go through all the questions here today, we have 38 questions, but I'll gladly share this list of questions to the presenters, and hopefully if they can choose a few ones and reply, then we can share through the blog of the society a few more answers. But maybe we still have 2-3 minutes. I'll let Irene, do you want to pick any question that you would like to answer, or any other comments that you like to say to wrap up?
We can go probably on the example of the variable that was difficult to quantify.
Yeah, this one. So can you please give an example of variable that was difficult to quantify and what the final looked like? Was it a 5-point Likert scale with a distribution or something else?
No, it was slightly different. Coco, do you want to add more on that, since that is related to the part that you presented?
So example of the one variable, I'm trying to think about the most difficult variable. I actually thought like the maintenance one also eventually was a bit of difficult because all of the other variables were either based on, literature, or we have those kind of quantification forms helping. But maintenance turned out to be like something as a high leverage points for the model, and then we have to come back to it with like more of like information. So it wasn't like a 5-point Likert scale, I would say. I think we went back to also the quantification form to the maintenance team, and they provide us information of what's the maintenance budget they have, and how many people are working on the maintenance, and if volunteers are participating in that. So I think it's probably more of structural information for that sector in general. And for specific variables, some of them are dimensionless, some of them, for example, with a budget, I think that's the specific variable that we have. I don't think we deal with anything specifically with distribution for this model. But we had something like aggregating the weights from if there's multiple like effects and factors influence something. And Iran, do you want to say a bit of like the weight aggregation thing?
Yes, but before to go there, I think that yes, the maintenance example is a great example. We didn't go in the 5-point Likert scale because it was not about, was more about providing information of what, for example, interconnection between maintenance and space condition will look like, or estimate the parameters, and then getting, of course, input data that sometimes were easy to provide from the stakeholder we're providing, like the maintenance yearly budget, but then sometimes times was about the role of capacity and skills that were of course influencing the overall then actual maintenance. So we work at the, as Coco said, more on the structure and the estimation of parameters and nonlinear relationship and relationship in general.
Great, thank you, Irene. As I said, unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all the questions today, but I'll share this list with you, Irene, and Coco and Nikki, and maybe you can pick a few more and answer, and I'll gladly share through the society blog. And together with the record, this session is being recorded, so the recording will also be shared with you guys and any other additional resources that the presenters may want to add. I do want to take the final minute of this webinar to invite you again to join us in the International System Dynamics Conference. We're meeting in Boston in the United States at the Boston University in the first week of August. You can prepare your submissions to be sent in January until March. I want to thank the presenters again. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Rene. And thank you, Coco. This was such a great webinar. Great to have you here. The audience, 150 people joined us today. So thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good Thanksgiving, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.
And thanks, Fernando and Christy.
Thank you. Thank you, Coco.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.